This week's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show is brought to you by the People's Company. That's right, they are back as a sponsor because so often I hear from farmers throughout Iowa and throughout the Midwest who are listening to the podcast while they are planting, while they are harvesting. They're in their tractors, they're in their combines, which makes the People's Company a perfect partner for the Moonlight Graham Show here. As you guys probably well know, the People's Company is based in West Des Moines, Iowa, but they've really grown to be one of the nation's leading providers in land brokerage, land management, land appraisal, and investment services. These guys, and I know Andrew Zelmer and Matt Adams over there at the People's Company, these guys live and breathe farmland, farm management, and they know that industry better than anybody. So if you're looking to buy a farm, sell a farm, having an auction coming up, call the People's Company. They are the best in the business. Check them out at peoplescompany.com.
This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show. Once again, I'm your host, Tim Flattery, and today's Moonlighter is another Major League Baseball player from the state of Iowa. And not only did this guy play in the major leagues, but he played for the 1996 Seattle Mariners. And if you remember the 1996 Seattle Mariners, let me read some of the guys on the roster of that team. We're talking A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez, Ken Griffey Jr., Jay Buhner, Edgar Martinez, Joey Cora. You remember these teams. On the pitching staff, it had the big unit, Randy Johnson, Jamie Moyer, Sterling Hitchcock, Norm Charlton, some of the greatest players the game of baseball has ever seen, and one of the most popular teams of the 1990s. Our Moonlighter for today is Matt Wagner, who started 14 games on that 1996 Seattle Mariners team. Matt Wagner grew up in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And this guy, we're talking like 6'5", 6'6", broad shoulders, your prototypical right-handed pitcher. And out of high school, Matt went from Cedar Falls High School all the way down to University of Arkansas to begin his college career. And by the end of his freshman year at Arkansas, Matt was the ace pitcher for one of the best college teams in the country and absolutely exploding on the baseball scouting scene. He had a fastball in the mid to upper 90s and was the type of pitcher that scouts dream of. The problem is that Matt blew his arm out. He blew his shoulder out after his freshman year and had to leave Arkansas and was going back to the University of Northern Iowa, where he's from in Cedar Falls, just to go to school. When the head coach at Iowa State found out that Matt Wagner was back at school and not playing baseball anymore, he called up Matt to say that he had a spot on the Iowa State team if he wanted to come down there and rehab his arm. So that's what Matt did. And he went down to Ames, Iowa and played for Bobby Randall and the Iowa State Cyclones. And he took a year off from pitching. And during that time, his shoulder healed up. And wouldn't you know, just 1 year later, Matt was back in the rotation for the Iowa State Cyclones and ended up being drafted in the third round by the Seattle Mariners, where he quickly worked his way up into the minor leagues and got up to the major leagues in 1996 to be a part of that great Mariners team that was managed by Lou Piniella, of course. And it was just so fun to get caught up with Matt Wagner. He lives down in the Des Moines area now, and he came over for the interview, actually, before we had all this social distancing. I was waiting to release some of these baseball episodes for opening day, but I've been tired to sit around on some of these and wanted to get them out. So I think you guys are really going to love this episode with Matt Wagner. He's a great guy. He's a great storyteller. And it's always fun to talk baseball, especially with a guy that played with A-Rod and Ken Griffey Jr. and the big unit. And guys, if you like what we're doing here on the Moonlight Graham Show, make sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever it is that you listen to your podcast. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Subscribe to the Moonlight Graham Show and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. So enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter Matt Wagner. But before we get to our interview, I know it's a tough time right now and a lot of people are out of work. So I wanted to talk about a new sponsor we have on the show, buildiowa.org, because the construction industry, especially throughout the Midwest, is still up and running and hiring. And so I was just on this website, buildiowa.org, and what really stood out to me was how much the professional men and women in this industry make. Did you know that professional estimators on average make between $62,000 and $80,000 a year. How about crane operators? What a cool job that is. They make between 60 and 70 grand a year on average. The other great part about buildiowa.org is how they spell out exactly how you can get started in the 27 different careers they have listed on the website. They have active resources to companies that are training and hiring. That's right, hiring right now. We know some of you Moonlighters are looking for a career change, or perhaps you've been impacted by this pandemic. If that's you, head on over to buildiowa.org and check out the incredible careers available right now in the construction industry. There's also a link to a job board that lists active jobs that are open right now. The good people at Build Iowa are here to help, and they want to make you aware that there are rewarding career options available for you. And for those of you on social media, check them out. You can find them Build Iowa on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. That's right, buildiowa.org. All right, we are back in studio, in the Moonlight Graham Show studio with former big leaguer Matt Wagner. Matt, thank you for joining the podcast.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So you were a kid that grew up in the 70s and 80s in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Who were your baseball heroes growing up?
Growing up, I always enjoyed watching Nolan Ryan. Kind of tried to model myself after him early on. And then, of course, when Dwight Gooden came onto the scene, in high school, I wound up taking his jersey number, kind of modeling after him. So I'd say those two were probably from a player standpoint. I would say probably, my dad had a big influence on me. He never played anything past high school, but he was one that anytime I wanted to, play catch, he never said no. I literally cannot remember him ever saying no to a game of catch, and throwing pop-ups, and he could throw the ball, it seemed like, pretty high. And I have two brothers, so I had always had a throwing partner if my dad wasn't around. But so anyway, I'd say my dad, and that from a player standpoint. I mean, coaches along the way too. But
so you're a tall guy. Was baseball the game of choice in the Wagner household growing up, or did you guys play hoops as well?
So growing up, my parents' house wound up being kind of a hub. We got really lucky. So their backyard was undeveloped ground right by College Square Mall, and so we wound up. My dad he bought an old mower. He wound up letting us mow in a baseball field, and then he built a backstop so the ball wouldn't go too far behind into somebody's yard or whatever, in our yard as well. And so we were able to kind of create neighborhood games there constantly. But then we also had two basketball hoops. We had standard height 10 foot, and then we had one that's about 8 foot.
The dunking hoop.
Dunk hoop. And these games got so out of control. I mean, all of them did. The baseball as well. We played a lot of football games out in the front as well, and in that open lot. But I guess once it got too cold out. But
this sounds like a childhood dream. Like you were able to create your own baseball field and basically full court basketball court in your backyard. This is what kids dream of.
It was awesome. And a lot of these games, we actually, one of those old camcorders, we'd set it up, not really so much for the baseball games, because I would say we were younger when we played in the backyard in essence. But we played the basketball all the way through high school, and we would wind up, there were some pretty bloody days out there. The games. So my older brother was 1 grade ahead of me. My younger brother 1 grade behind. So we kind of had 3 grades of people that would congregate at my house, and it was total chaos.
God bless your mother. 3 boys right in a row. That had to be crazy when you're all in high school.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of chaos. So a lot of testosterone in that home, and she put up with a lot. I suppose it probably made her a stronger person as a result. But I know my dad. So they and they still live in the same house that I grew up in.
Oh, that's fun.
And so they have changes of siding. They had the old aluminum siding for houses built at that era, and it was so dented up. And probably about 10 years ago, they changed it to vinyl. But it was kind of like taking away all those memories of bodies and balls hitting the side of the house. That there probably some blood trails as well.
You know, what you described there, kind of the sandlot baseball, kids playing on their own. You know, before we went on air, we were talking about, you know, here in the Des Moines area, and you have all of these suburban schools, and they run really structured sports programs, and it's really hard for kids to play multiple sports because of that. All the seasons are almost year round, or they bleed into one another. But, you know, the days passed, right? The way we talk about our childhoods is everybody played at the sandlot like the movies, and everybody played on their own. It seems like that's been lost a little bit now. I know you have some kids. What's your perspective on kind of that change?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, times are different. Obviously, you know, trying to make sure your kids are safe is one thing, but access to fields is a lot different too. You know, when we were able to do that because we had the open area in our backyard, but when we started getting a little bit older with baseball, we kind of needed a little bit bigger space. And so, but we could walk over to a public facility, walk on there, and quite frankly, you know, we'd always pick like a softball field or something, and we'd play homer ball.
Yeah.
You know, so you had a fence, you could kind of determine how far the ball was going. But, you know, it's I'd say it's unfortunate because you just don't have, you know, kids. I don't know. I mean, our 15-year-old son would rather, you know, play video games. I mean, he's still playing with other people at the same time, but through a headset and a microphone, as opposed to, hey, I'm getting on my bike. Let's go meet down at the, you know, park, and let's play some long toss, or let's just, you know,
get some bloody noses playing hoops in the backyard.
Exactly. And they just aren't, and it's unfortunate. They're not doing it. I mean, they're having their own experiences, and they'll look back on it probably, hopefully favorably. But I just know, I mean, memories from myself growing up it's something I wouldn't trade for the world. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Were you a baseball card collector growing up? Because you grew up kind of right in the baseball card boom, right? Like the 80s and the late 80s was kind of the baseball card boom when everybody started producing them. Everybody thought, you know, oh, if you find something in the attic, it's going to be worth, you know, $100,000 and you can retire. You were right, you know, as a teenager, right in that era. Were you collecting?
Absolutely. I see your box over here on the floor, and I love your man cave here, by the way. So I was, and I actually still have my entire collection that I grew up collecting.
Ooh.
And my son has his own collection. In the last couple of years, I'd say he's faded a little bit, and I've got to downsize. My wife is going to kill me because I still will find stuff.
Get a storage unit, Matt.
Oh my, no,
you can't get rid of them. You can't get rid of them.
There's stuff that I've accumulated. I got on a kick for a while where I was like, I wanted every set from like every year. Like, I mean, not just, you know, Topps, but I wanted Donruss, I wanted Fleer, and it's like, okay, I got to either have a bigger house or I just got to downsize some of this stuff. So my son's bedroom, his closet, I feel bad, but he doesn't really care. He never complains about it. But his closet's got stuff in it. My closet's got stuff in it. Our basement, one of our spare bedroom closet's got stuff in it. My wife's closet got stuff in it. I got to get rid of some stuff at some point. But I was always a collector growing up. I mean, Craig Falsgraf, he's kind of well known in the Waterloo, Cedar Falls area. He still does it. He still does card shows. He's a guy that growing up, we went to his house. I mean, it was like every kid's dream. I mean, this guy was a little bit older than us, you know, and we'd bike over to his house, and he'd have cards set out on the pool table in cases, display cases, and then he had another thing that was locked up that we were all like, man, this guy's a millionaire, you know? And I mean, I'm sure he's done fine with it, but it never really panned out quite as, I mean, there's still a lot of stuff that's worth a lot of money, but I mean, my cards, and plus I handled them so much that, you know, the cards that, you know, they're just not worth what we had always hoped they would be, but its sentimental value to me is priceless. So.
Did you have one guy, like, did you collect all the Doc Gooden cards? I remember growing up, Ozzie Smith was my guy growing up, so I tried to accumulate all of my Ozzie Smith cards. For whatever reason, I love Ozzie Smith, and I had, like, you know, 100 of his cards or whatever.
Yeah, so again, you know, Nolan Ryan and Dwight Gooden were kind of the two. You know, and then it kind of spiraled into like, ooh, whose card was hard to get this year, you know, for some reason.
Right.
You know, I mean, the card companies knew what they were doing. But, you know, there was always kind of like that rare card that it seemed like you'd open a whole box of cards and you might not get it, you know, or you open another box, you get one. And, you know, other than that, I would say, and I really wasn't much of a set builder at the time. Since then, I've kind of turned into a set builder, which that's part of what I got to get rid of.
Right.
It's accumulating way too many duplicates and triplicates. So
Do you have like one card that you think's worth a bunch of money, or like what's your most valuable piece that you have? Maybe we shouldn't say this publicly. People might be robbing your house or something.
Yeah, it's going to be out of my house. That's a good question.
Like a Mickey Mantle rookie, or one of those old. There's a few of those cards that are around, right? And some of them are like the Matt Wagner. You'll hear about that, or like a Ty Cobb, the cigarette cards from like the early the teens, right around there, are worth a bunch of money. There's not many of them around, but then there's like a Mantle rookie that's worth a bunch, and some of those.
Unfortunately, no, I don't have any of those. I have. Probably my best cards are probably going to be like the mid to late 70s. So, I mean, I can remember like literally as probably a 5-year-old, going to Walgreens and walking in there. Cards were probably 5-10 cents a pack. And every extra penny I got went to cards. And I'd sit there. We'd even like buy them and go sit on the floor in the mall, because Walgreens was attached to College Square Mall at the time. And we'd sit there and we'd, open up, stick the gum in our mouth and sit there and look through the cards. But I would say, because I did collect baseball, basketball, and football. And so I've got some, Julius Erving cards, stuff from that era. And then, into when, Bird would have come into the league, and Magic Johnson, huge Larry Bird fan. So I've got quite a few Larry Bird cards. I'd actually have to look back probably to see which of those, if any, are really worth much. I mean, again, to me, the sentimental value is because I remember going and sitting there and my brothers and collecting the cards, going and looking at that, Craig Falsgraf, Rollo, who we called him, and looking at his collection, and we all did it,
Well, and it's fun to look at. It tells a story of an era too, because the designs changed, the artworks changed, and there was a lot of design and art into some of those old cards. The box that you're looking at in my closet, I actually got at the family White Elephant Christmas party this year. One of my uncles found that in the basement, and most of it is just extras from sets, not worth anything. But a lot of the cards in that box are like 60s and 70s football cards. And the designs on those cards are so funny, like what they would do with the team logos and how they would display the team names, and the pictures that they use are just hilarious, because, it was a fun time for sports. Like there were a ton of characters in football, especially at that era. And, baseball is the same way. The guys with the crazy mustaches, or the hair coming out of their hats, or the funny pictures. Did you have the Billy Ripken card, or the 89 Griffey rookie? Like those are kind of some of the famous modern era cards.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were cards that everybody wanted to get a hold of, and anytime there was an error card, you wanted to try and get it, so I still have, and it's stuff I've accumulated, not stuff I kept, but I still have unopened wax boxes at my house. It's stuff like, I don't know, probably 90 Donruss, so it's absolutely worthless, taking up space in my house. But every so often, I'll go and grab 2 or 3 packs. I'll open them up, and it's like, it just kind of takes you back in time to, like, as a kid, and obviously at 90, I would have been a high school senior. But kind of going back in time to when you're a kid, the innocence of that, and just saying, man, I remember opening these packs and just looking, who did we get? And then you get used to the sequences, how they're cut and how they're put in the packs. And you're like, oh, you know what the next card's going to be, because you've opened so many packs. But it's a lot of fun. And still, and especially, then some of those guys, when I would have broken in, or before I broke into the big leagues, which was short-lived, but before I broke in, some of those guys who were playing in the late 80s, were around in the mid-90s. And so, some of those cards, it's like, oh, man, I wound up pitching against these guys. It's like crazy, so...
Yeah, that's the fun part of collecting, right? Is you can tie the eras together, and you'd always, at least I would look at the front, but then I'd spend most of the time on the back. Like I'd love digging in to like the fast facts, and you look at their career. I love the way baseball statistics play out on the back of a baseball card, because you can just see 40 home runs that year, 28 doubles that year, 305, 313. You can just tell the story of a guy's career really quickly. You're like, man, why didn't this guy get more recognition? He had good numbers, And I love baseball cards. And you said you pick up packs every now and again, and I do the same thing. And I can't stop. If I drive by a card shop, I just did it a couple months ago, like the rookie out in Clive. I stopped by there and I bought a box of unopened wax packs from like 91 or something like that. And
$5.
They're sitting here in my house, a box of unopened packs of cards. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I haven't even opened it. Like, I haven't even, taken the pleasure of opening it. But for some reason, like, in my head, they're still worth a gold mine.
Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just like I said, it's a trip back in time that you just it literally, it's like the whole world kind of stops around you when you do it. And it takes 5 minutes, you sit there, you open it up, and you'll even, like, you grab the card, you look at the front, and I'd say probably more so now, kind of aware of, like, oh, okay, this photo was taken, if it's an action photo, which most of them are, this was at Old Comiskey.
Yeah.
Or, you kind of look at what field they're at, kind of who's in the background, if there is anybody. And then you read the back and you kind of you fill in some of that backstory. So we were big into Stratomatic too. So I don't know if you ever remember Stratomatic.
That was
but
a little before my time. I know about it now because I'm kind of in that Twitter community that is into baseball cards and retro baseball stuff, and Stratomatic comes up all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, that Twitter world, though, I don't know if you're on Twitter at all, and it's kind of a hellhole, and it's the worst.
Time waster.
But the baseball community down there is really cool for this type of stuff. Like, there's some really cool design guys that do old logos, but then that baseball card stuff that you're talking about, like, old baseball card guys will go through the cards and realize, like, this picture of this player was used on 5 different cards from 5 different companies, or like one play with pictures from 5 different angles were used on the same card, which is like, those type of things are I mean, I find them interesting. I think the majority of the world couldn't care less about it, though.
Yeah, but I find that interesting too, and I'm on there a little bit. I follow more like the set breakers and stuff, like, or the case breakers. The people that are, which it's a colossal waste of time. But I do enjoy
the Darren
it.
Ravel and Gary V. Those are some famous guys that do it.
Buck City Breaks, guys like that are out there. It's pretty cool. I mean, you sit there and then you can buy into them too. I got a coworker that's like totally into that. His wife travels, and so she's gone on weekends sometimes. He sits there at his house and literally watches all these breaks, and he'd be like, hey, do you want to get into this break? And it's like, okay, we're like the third card, so we'll do it together. We're like the third card in the third pack or something, so that's going to be your card, and it's totally random, and it's just crazy. But they're opening kind of nice stuff, though, too, so you're going to get something decent out of it.
All right, enough baseball card talk. Let's talk about actual playing. So you grew up in Cedar Falls. We talked about your backyard game. You must have been a pretty good player in high school because you end up signing with the University of Arkansas out of high school. So how does University of Arkansas find you in Cedar Falls, Iowa? Because this is before perfect game baseball. Yeah. This is before a lot of travel ball, and we were talking about it earlier. You kind of stuck to the seasons back in the 80s, especially. So how does Arkansas find Matt Wagner?
Well, it's a great question. Small world. So my high school coach was pretty well connected, Dave Welter, great guy. Still stay in touch with him. And somehow word got to a guy named Bill Clark, old Brave Scout, still around actually. Just talked to somebody that still keeps in touch with him. And I actually just talked to my former head coach that reminded me that he got the call. So Norm DeBryan, Arkansas head coach, Bill Clark, the scout, was the one that put my name out to Arkansas. They didn't even see me. I mean, I literally sent them on VHS home video me throwing a bullpen, probably in the dome when you and I would have practiced.
Wow.
Had cages set up in the dome in the winter. I threw a bullpen, sent it off to him, highly recommended by Bill Young, and
they offer you a scholarship?
They made an offer to me without even without seeing me in person, and I took a visit down there and stuff too. But just recommend. And I wound up getting drafted by the Braves ultimately, which is who he was a scout for. But that's how. Which today it seems like that's impossible that would happen. But that's how it happened, and I was excited, obviously.
What were you like as a high school pitcher? Were you as tall as 6'6", good frame, and you got broad shoulders? For those of you listening in, you can't see Matt, but he's 6'6", 6'7", with broad shoulders. You're kind of the ideal, prototypical baseball pitcher frame.
Yeah, I would say that was part of it. I mean, I was I certainly weighed a lot less. I mean, not that I weigh that much now, but I was.
You were a kid.
I couldn't gain weight for my life. I mean, I just flat out couldn't. So I had that frame, I guess, I would say was probably desirable. I had a good arm. I was blessed with a very, very good arm. I could throw hard. My arm never really bothered me either. I mean, I'd throw in a doubleheader, which that would never happen today, but we didn't know. I mean, my coach actually looked out for me, but we didn't know. I'd throw 7 in game 1 and I'd close game 2.
Wow.
Hour and a half later, I'm out there after I'm all cooled down and playing center field. Wagner, I'd come in, get my 8 warm-ups, and boom, I'm closing out game 2. So it never happened today, obviously. But
how hard were you throwing in high school? Did you have any of that data? Was anybody gunning you? Was Bill Clark from the Braves saying, "Hey"?
I said Bill Young a minute ago. Yeah, Bill Clark. So I did attend a couple where you get an invite.
Yeah, the Ida Grove one.
Exactly.
I think the Braves. It was probably Bill Clark always has one in the August every year at Riverfront Stadium in Waterloo. Yep. That might be him that's still running that one.
Yeah. So I attended a couple of those, and I know, as a sophomore, and I know this because I wrote a paper on it in high school. I think I hit 84 as a sophomore, which today's standards isn't really that great. There's a lot of guys that are sophomores throwing 84 or harder, and I think I probably touched 90 as a senior. But I do know once I got to Arkansas and we got into fall ball, that's when they were gunning us all the time, and I know that I got up 94. In the fall. But I had also started gaining some more weight. I mean, I was probably 6'4" when I graduated high school, and grew at least an inch and a half since then. But my freshman year, put on about 25 pounds that I needed. I mean, at athletic dorm, we had a buffet style meal for every single meal, and it was inside the dorm, and it was unbelievable food. So I literally would just sit there and eat, trying to gain weight, and it ultimately paid off. Some of it probably wasn't the best weight to gain, but I did, and that, I think, probably that additional weight, the inertia, having that, I started adding to my fastball and then working on the other pitches too.
So you ended up transferring to Iowa State. What was the reason for that? How did it go at Arkansas?
Man, you're probably going to have 2 hours worth of story here, but I'll try and be brief. So basically, I threw a lot as a freshman.
Right away.
True
freshman in the SEC, they throw you right out there.
Southwest Conference at the time.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I almost played.
Man, you're older than I thought.
I'm old. I am old. I almost played in 4 different conferences. So when I got to Arkansas as a freshman, we were in the Southwest Conference. It was the last year of the Southwest Conference.
So is that Texas and Baylor?
Texas Tech, TCU, Houston, Rice. We probably named
great baseball conference. Most good. 4 of them came to the Big 8, joined the Big 8 to make the Big 12. Exactly. Then you had Arkansas went to obviously the SEC, and then what conference is that? Conference USA maybe is where the rest of them went.
A couple of them went. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. So I wound up making the spring trip, which was fantastic, as a freshman to Hawaii. They only took a few freshmen, but I had a good fall, and we had a very good recruiting class. So when I got down there, I was like, holy cow, these guys are good. And we wound up, then we played, after we came back, we played in a tournament down in Shreveport, Louisiana. I think they still have the tournament. It was called the Dixie Classic, I think, at the time. And I wound up, I pitched, the ball didn't even leave the infield. I mean, I was on. And so then we were starting conference play. So then the coach said, hey, we're going to have you start game 3. This is at Texas A&M.
Wow.
And it was, at the time, it was a Friday night single game, Saturday doubleheader. We'd lost Friday night, lost game 1 of the doubleheader, and we're sitting in the locker room in between games, and I know I'm pitching, and I'm kind of nervous. Well, I'm really nervous.
And this is at A&M?
At A&M.
Which is one of the toughest places to pitch in college baseball.
Unbelievable. I mean, the fans are literally, there's a fence, like a chain link fence above the dugout, that the fans are, I mean, you walk off the field and they're literally, I mean, they could spit on you if they wanted.
And they're
looking
they're looking to talk too.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it was so, there were more fans there than I'd ever played in front of. So it was pretty crazy. So we're sitting there, and Coach DeBryan is like, if we lose this game, we may as well pack in the season. We were preseason 5 in the country. So we were good. You know, they had won the Southwest Conference 2 previous years. We were going for the third, and I wound up going out there pitching really well. We won the game like 2-1 or 3-2, something like that. And then I stayed in the conference rotation pitching, sometimes game 3, then bumped up to game 2 on Saturday. And probably by the third or fourth conference series, I was a Friday night starter as a freshman, in the Southwest Conference. And I wound up actually having a pretty darn good year. My last start, my arm starts bothering me. Wichita State comes into town. They're number 1. You know, Dryford's with those guys, Kenny Steenstra. I mean, you look at
that was like the glory days.
Those guys, they
of
were
Wichita State baseball.
Yep.
You had like the Joe Carter through Casey Blake were kind of like the run of the Gene Stevenson years.
Absolutely, and they came in number 1 in the country. It was already on our schedule at the start of the year that after our conference play was over, right before the conference tournament, we were going to play Wichita State at home. So we wound up playing them in doubleheader, and I mean, my arm did not feel good.
Shoulder, elbow,
shoulder.
Yeah,
but beat them. I mean, I gave up 1 run. I hit Doug Mirabelli, their catcher, who wound up in the big leagues for a little bit, with the bases loaded, and that's how they got their 1 run. We beat them like 10-1 in that game. A couple weeks later, they go on to win the College World Series, and that kind of, I mean, I had a good year, but that game kind of put me on the map as far as like, hey, where do we see this guy? You know, projecting him out when he's eligible for the draft again. I didn't know these conversations were going on, but anyway, that's kind of what happened. But so I go after the season's over. I told our coach, I told Coach DeBryan, I said, you know, my arm, it just has not been feeling that good. So we wound up getting some tests done. Came back home, got an MRI that showed a complete tear in one of the rotator cuff tendons, which was probably a misdiagnosis to a certain extent. Because I could still throw, but it just hurt. So it probably wasn't a full thickness tear like the results showed. But nonetheless, I wound up going back down there for my sophomore year. My arm just never really came around. So I'd pitch and then take 3 weeks off. I mean, they were very good about it. I mean, but
what do they do for you back then? So you get the MRI that they say, hey, we got a rotator cuff problem, which back in those days is like kind of like a death sentence.
Yep.
You know, like an ACL tear in the 80s, that'll end your career. Or a rotator cuff up until the last 20 years, that was like, you know, UCL. Those things ended careers.
Yeah.
So when you got the diagnosis, what do they say to you? Like, hey, we're going to try to rehab it. We're going to give you some pain shots and see. I mean, what are they doing for you?
So rehab. I mean, I remember Coach DeBryan went to the doctor's visit. So I got the MRI results. Got him sent down to probably one of the guys that worked with the school down there in Arkansas. And Coach DeBryan went to the doctor's visit with me, and the guy had me on the table doing some testing with my arm. And I just remember like it was yesterday. He's like, you know, based on the MRI results and based on what I'm seeing here, he said, I'm not sure you're ever going to play baseball again. And it was kind of almost like reality setting in at that time, just going, holy cow, this is kind of real. But they were really good with me. And I finally got to the point where I'm like, well, you know, I'm 6 hours at the time, probably closer to 7 hours based on the roads back then. But drive to Arkansas, I'm like, you know, I should probably just go home, finish up my school and get on with life. So my younger brother was going to UNI. And so I'm on campus. This is like the weekend before classes start. Scheduling class. I'm walking around, you know, campus with him, got my schedule made. And the weekend before classes started, Randall finds out from my high school coach that I'm back and I'm not going back down to Arkansas.
And this is Bobby Randall at Iowa State.
Exactly. Yep. And I still stay in touch with him as well. But so he gets a hold of me and is like, hey, I have no scholarship money for you. I can probably find a way to get your books paid for. He probably paid for them out of pocket, honestly. And my girlfriend at the time was going to be going to Iowa State. And I'm like, you know, who I've been married to now it'll be 25 years in November. So
shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was like, you know what? May as well. He's like, I'll stick you at first base. You can hit. And I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of fun. But my arm, I mean, they had no expectation of me pitching. My arm winds up starting to get better. Trying to make a long story short, my arm winds up starting to get better. All of a sudden, I'm playing long toss, and Jerry McNerney, one of the assistant coaches there, we're playing long toss in the rec center, and he's like, man, you're not out there pitching, but the ball is coming out of your hand. All of these guys are fine, but the ball's coming out of your hand crazy good, you know? And I'm like, it actually is feeling really good. It was kind of bizarre. So I went back to Iowa City, had another test done there where they shoot the dye in there, CT arthrogram, whatever it's called, and the dye didn't bleed through. So
something had healed.
Something had healed somehow. So
does the rotator cuff heal?
So it scars over. It can scar over, which that's part of the story. You know, after I had my first surgery in Montreal, the team doctor, one of the very first things I remember in post-op was, so when did you tear this before? And he's like, it's scarred over perfectly.
Whoa.
He's like, this is crazy. But so I wound up buying some more time, obviously, that led to, you know, getting the chance to play. But I literally thought when I left Arkansas, I'm never going to be able to play again. So
how's the arm feel today?
You know what? Actually really good. I've had 4 surgeries total, had 3 back-to-back in years 97, 98, 99, and then I had another one just over 10 years ago with Dr. Honkamp at DeMoss. And that was more labrum. I think it was a small rotator cuff tear that he didn't even address. But the labrum, I was shoveling and hit one of those, where the felt is.
Oh, yeah.
I was running with the shovel. I'm a complete idiot. But so I hit it and it jarred my arm, and I'm like, that didn't feel good. So anyway, but Honkamp did a great job. And up until this year, I'd coached my son so much, so I was throwing a lot. And I mean, I could throw pretty good. You know, I mean, it wouldn't bounce back. I mean, my arm would be sore for a couple of days if I really extended.
But on a hot summer night, you get her going.
I can throw. Yeah, but now with him going to the high school level, I haven't been throwing at all. This is the first year in a while that I haven't been throwing, because I threw with my older daughter when she was coming up, and we could play long toss, and it was a lot of fun. But otherwise, absolutely, my arm feels really good.
Well, if you want to toss, Matt, I got a backyard. I got a glove right here.
Absolutely.
You know, if you need a catch partner, I'm your guy. So you're at Iowa State, though. The arm's starting to feel pretty good. I mean, we mentioned it earlier. You get drafted in like the 23rd round out of high school by the Braves. Mm-hmm. You have a great freshman year at Arkansas, end up hurting the arm, transfer to Iowa State. Things are coming around with the arm, and then you get drafted like the 32nd round maybe after your junior year, or I'm not sure what.
So that was my redshirt year.
Okay.
So they wound up, I get down there, my arm's starting to feel a little bit better, and it's like, well, maybe you're going to pitch, and they wind up redshirting me. And there's a story behind that, but they wind up redshirting me, and I get to the end of the year, Coach Randall, you know, meeting with every player, and I'm sitting there, and he's like, hey, there's a chance you could get drafted. I'm like, what? I didn't throw a pitch. And he's like, yeah, but teams know you've been throwing. And going back to my freshman year at Arkansas, and then really the performance against Wichita State.
Scouts knew you.
Scouts were there because Darren Dreifert, is
number one pick of the draft.
Absolutely. So they're looking at him, and I'm there pitching, and it's like these two are kind of, I mean, this is, in a couple years, watch out for who's going to be top in the, and I didn't know any of that conversation was going on. I find out later, but so scouts, even though, because I didn't have surgery, and so scouts were kind of still like, hey, what's going on with them? And then I wound up, so I redshirted, did get drafted. There's a whole story behind that too. It's crazy, but Dodgers, and decide it's not going to work out, go back to school, and then I did pitch that season and had a good year. But my velocity was back. I mean, I'm throwing mid-90s, and that's when, I mean, at Iowa State there weren't that many fans. There were a lot of radar guns sitting back behind, and
yeah, because if you look at your baseball reference page, you see that high school, and you see the 36th round, after your redshirt year. But if you don't know the story, you're like, well, how in the heck do you get drafted in the 36th round? Because most of the times at a 4-year school, you get drafted after your junior year, and you got to go after your junior year because you have to have all the leverage. But then you get drafted in the 3rd round after what would have been, I guess, your redshirt junior year. So that's why it makes sense, because you're back healthy, you're throwing gas, you're throwing well, and you still have 1 year left of eligibility to use as leverage to get teams to take a chance on you.
Yeah, and I was ready. I mean, at that point, my arm did really feel good, and I was like, you know what, because teams were inquiring. I mean, I was getting a lot of questionnaires and scouts coming even to my house and having conversations, and a Met scout, remember at my parents' house before the draft. he's like, here's how the draft lays out for us. We've got the number 1 pick. We have like the 22nd pick. And then they had two sandwich picks because they had lost a couple free agents. He's like, if you're available at the 22nd pick, we're going to take you. And it did wound up not happening. I mean, I wound up going in the 3rd round, which was still very high, very fortunate to have gone that high. But I mean, there were several teams that flat out said, we're taking you in the 1st round.
Wow.
And the Mets in particular, because they had so many picks. But that's fine. I mean, it worked out where I got a great opportunity with Seattle. But I was telling every team, I'm going to sign. And I even went down to Kansas City before the draft, had an MRI done, paid for out of pocket, and faxed it, who I was ultimately signed with as an agent, faxed it to every major league team pre-draft so they could see. I'm going to show tendonitis, but who doesn't have tendonitis, So just to kind of say, hey, he's healthy and wants to sign. So
what was Iowa State baseball like back in the mid 90s?
It was actually really good. I mean, it was, the top to bottom, Coach Randall, great guy, Lyle Smith, Jerry McNerney, great coaches. And
I played with Lyle Smith's son at UNI.
Jason?
Yep. Jason.
Yeah.
Jason and I
great
were the
kid,
same age. Yep.
Great kid. So it was different. I mean, obviously, Arkansas is it's a higher level program from top to bottom, but it was interesting. I would say Iowa State had the ability to take players that were, maybe from the state of Iowa or surrounding states that weren't as highly touted. They'd get them to go there and they develop them. And, guys like Don Wingert, that was just ahead of me there. I mean, Mike Myers, you could go
there's a couple big leaders
guys.
there.
I mean, there's a lot of guys that came out of Iowa State and had a lot of success, but they did develop there. We were always at a disadvantage being at that north.
Northern
you from your days playing at UNI. You're limited. The second you have your first game of catch outside is on your spring trip,
right?
And these other teams have been outside for a month and a half, and they've already been playing games, and we're like, holy cow, shell shock when you get out there, and it's like, yeah, these guys, their timing isn't as off as ours is. So you go on your spring trip, you get banged around, but by the time the conference tournament rolls around, all of a sudden Oklahoma State's going, they got some pitching over there, and we kind of got to be a little bit careful. So kind of even the playing field as the season went on, and we kind of got our feet underneath us. But Arkansas was just, certainly a better program. But Iowa State, very dedicated coaches, and quite frankly, a lot of guys that were willing to work hard too. Great teammates, still keep in touch with a lot of guys, and had a lot of fun up there.
That's great. So you end up getting drafted in the 3rd round, Seattle Mariners, you sign. What was that draft day like?
Crazy. I remember spent some of it at my parents' house, and I can guarantee you we had some basketball games going on in the driveway, which were always rough. But kind of waiting, like we know draft day's here, and it wasn't that long into the draft. It was 80 something pick overall, so it wasn't that long into it that finally the phone rings, and turns out it's the Mariners that wind up taking me, and so the scout gets a hold of us and says, hey, can I come in and have a conversation with you? And we'd like to get you out there playing as quick as possible. But it was awesome. It was, kind of one of those where, I was drafted out of high school. I didn't really give it a whole lot of consideration, just because I felt like I wasn't ready for pro ball. And then when I did give the Dodgers a decent amount of consideration. I don't really, I can get into that story if you want me to, but it's a long story. And, I kind of wanted to try and make that work, but, hindsight, everything worked out, for a reason, and was able to make that, the 3rd round the following year. And, but yeah, it was crazy. It was awesome. It was, it's a great honor, blessing to have gotten that call and get that opportunity, dream come true. Having the legitimate opportunity to go and play pro baseball. I grew up as a kid always wanting to, and having, within a year or two prior to that, thinking I would never play baseball again. It was almost like, holy cow, is this somebody pinch me?
Well, and you get drafted by the Mariners, which might not mean a lot to a lot of people, but at that time, they have Ken Griffey Jr. on their team. And Ken Griffey Jr. was, one of the greatest players of all time, maybe one of the top 15 players ever to play the game of baseball. And he was the next thing. Like, you knew in 1989 when this guy got drafted, like, he was going to be the guy. And it turned out he was. He was that guy, and he fulfilled all the expectations. So you get drafted to that organization. And every kid that lived through the 90s was a baseball fan remembers those Mariners teams, right? You had Jay Buhner and A-Rod and Dan Wilson and Griffey and Joey Cora and Vizquel on those earlier teams, right? And so everybody remembered. Oh, and Jamie Moyer was on, on those teams. Randy Johnson, the big
Edgar
unit.
Martinez.
Yeah, I mean, you could just go on and on. Like, those were some of the most popular teams at that time. And a few short years after you get drafted, you're playing right along with those guys. What was that experience like?
Oh, it was crazy. I really did the organization. I didn't really know a lot about them. I mean, here we don't get a lot of those West Coast games on
right.
TV.
They're on too late.
Absolutely. I mean, I wasn't paying attention to him. Everybody knew Griffey because he was kind of becoming the face of baseball at the time. So I didn't really know a lot about him. I was just excited to have the opportunity to go out there, but being around, it was just crazy. I got my first taste of it. So I signed in 94, went to Appleton, which was an absolute riot. We had 6 guys in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was chaos 24/7. So I get a call after, and it's at the not the All-Star break, the Hall of Fame induction time. So I get a call. They were calling up about 6 or 7 minor league guys to play in the Hall of Fame game. They don't play that game anymore. It's an exhibition game. So they're playing the Phillies up in Cooperstown or Utica or whatever Doubleday Field is up there. So I'm one of them. It was right before the strike too. So all of these guys were on the road. They were in Chicago playing the White Sox. I happened to be on the road. I can't remember where, but they're like, hey, you're going to meet the team. Me and Giomar Guevara was our shortstop. They asked him off of our team as well to go. So the two of us, and he hardly spoke any English, we wound up at a Mexican restaurant in Chicago that I wish to this day I could still find because he took me to a place that was unbelievable. It was so good. I wouldn't be able to find it today. But so they called us up. We had very little conversation because I didn't speak enough English or Spanish. And I only kind of knew the slang stuff, which shouldn't be repeated.
Right. If you've been in a dugout, you know it.
Exactly. Yeah. So we wind up meeting the team, and the guys weren't real happy. The big league guys, not with us. It was more strike is looming. They're on the road. They're going to play an exhibition game that they're really not getting paid for.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, I just want to get home or whatever. So. And it was a morning too. So we met the team in Chicago, flew with the team out to New York, landed the plane at a pretty small airport, quite frankly. They were saying it was like, this plane is about as big as you can fly into this airport. But it was really cool from my standpoint. So I get on the bus and Alex Rodriguez, I sit down and none of these people know who I am. They're like, what are we doing here?
Right.
And I'm recognizing some of these guys, and I'd never even been to spring training, so these guys had no idea who I am.
Yeah, this is right after you get drafted.
Absolutely. So I'm walking, find an open seat on the bus, and I feel this tap on my shoulder from the seat behind to my right, and then I see this hand about the size of mine reached out, and he's like, "Hey, Alex Rodriguez, nice to meet you."
Wow.
I'm like, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And so he was. I mean. Outwardly knew, hey, this guy doesn't know anybody on this bus. I mean, some of the other guys, because they had been in the organization, I was the only person out of the draft that was asked to, or Trey Moore might have been, but I think I was the only one out of the draft that was asked to play in that game. So anyway,
and you would have known who A-Rod was, even though
totally.
A-Rod was like, he was younger than you even at that time, but he got called up to the bigs, I think at like 18 or 19 and played in the playoffs when he hadn't spent much of the time like regular season. I think in like maybe 93 or 94, right? In there.
Yeah, it was in 94. So he wound up, anyway, so he says hi to me and so we get there and, they hand me a uniform and I mean, I'm like a kid in a candy store, I was like, holy cow, this is crazy, And so they send me down to the bullpen, and the guys in the bullpen, Goose Gossage, and guys they're just sitting there because there's no pressure. I mean, it wasn't like it was an exhibition game.
Was Goose Gossage the coach, or was he there for the Hall of Fame thing?
He was right at the end of his career.
Goose Gossage was on the Mariners in 94?
Yep.
That's insane.
Right at the end of his career. So, and I think that was probably literally probably was the end of his career. So he's there. I mean, in all these other, I mean, otherwise it was the entire team, you know. And so I wind up getting a call to pitch in this game, you know. So I wound up throwing 3 innings of one-hit baseball and wound up getting the win in the game, which for me, so then they didn't even have like locker rooms at the field. They had a shuttle going back and forth. We showed up to the field in a bus, and then they had a shuttle going back and forth to this high school where we could take a shower and stuff. So, you know, they're like, hey, you know, you're done pitching, you know, go get some ice, hop in the car, go over there. So I always get a kick out of this story. So I go back to the high school. I go to get in the shower. So Griffey, who wound up, he's like, he has, you know, he understands. Dude played for the fans every single day, but he asked to be the leadoff batter that game. Got his AB, maybe got 2 ABs, and is like, all right, I'm shutting it down. Didn't want to get hurt either, you know. So, and A-Rod was kind of the same as like, okay, we don't want to they want to be part of the game for the fans, but they didn't want him to get hurt in an exhibition game, which is why they didn't have any regular pitchers throw. So the minor league guys were the ones that got called up for this game. So I wind up, I'm back there, and I go to take a shower before I go on ice, you know, and I walk in there, and there's 2 people in the shower, A-Rod and Griffey. So I'm standing there. You can picture this. The 3 of us standing there buck naked with our hands toward each other. Hey, how's it going? You know, so it was kind of like, holy cow, that's how you met. I mean, I had already met A-Rod in essence, but so my first introduction to King Griffey Jr. was,
you met him naked,
was buck naked and in a shower. So it's kind of one of those stories. It's like, holy cow, is that, that's really how it happened.
What a way to start your professional career, though.
Oh, it was awesome. And quite frankly, I got some pretty good exposure, you know, going out there. The Phillies were coming off the World Series in '93. And I pitched really well. I mean, we were facing the regular hitters for the most part.
Do you remember who you faced? I mean, did you face Kruk and Morandini and Dykstra?
Kruk had come out. I remember Lieberthal was like a huge prospect at the time. Yeah. And so I do remember that, and I was like, oh, I kind of got to be careful with these guys. But, you know, there were a couple lineouts in there, you know, you're like, geez, I mean, 95 on the black, they're turning it around. You're like, okay, this is a little different than A-ball. But, yeah, I mean, I'd have to probably look back and see who all I did face. Honestly, it was such a blur. I do remember I got the win, but I had 3 innings, 1-hit ball. The guys were really hard to strike out. I do remember that, but It was crazy. It was, but I did get exposure to Piniella and the coaching staff for them to say, oh, here's one of our minor league guys, you know, out of this draft that is, you know, going to be someone that we look to in the future potentially. So it was good for me. So then, you know, got through that season. And when I did get the spring training invite, it was good for me because the players then at least could say, oh yeah, you came and played in the Hall of Fame game. For most of those guys were still obviously with the team. So it was good for me to not walk into a clubhouse for the very first time. That was kind of over, you know,
right.
To be able to go in and actually know a lot of the guys then. So
yeah, because by '96 you get the spring training invite for big league spring training. So you're kind of getting reacquainted with the guys. And by, I think, June 5th of '96, you get that was your debut.
Yep.
Did you get the call the night before, 2 days before? How long had you been on the team before you towed the rubber?
Yeah, so I got the call. So we were playing up in Vancouver. So I was in AAA in the Pacific Coast League. We were playing in Vancouver, and it was kind of a crazy night. So Mike Butcher, who's been a pitching coach at the major league level, been with the Angels and Nationals more recently. Crazy guy, literally crazy guy. He was one of our pitchers. He had been in the Angels organization. So I make all these stories long, so I apologize for that. But so Butcher's pitching. I'm in the stands charting. And so me and another guy, I can't remember who was with me in the stands. This game is a slow game. Butcher at one point, he knows all of these guys. I mean, the guy had been in the Angels organization for a long time. He knows all these guys. There's a guy in second base, can't remember who it is. He's like John with the guy. He's like, dude, you're giving him my signs, you know? And so all of a sudden they start into an argument and a brawl breaks out. I'm like, holy cow. So we had a delay for that. And then I think we had a weather delay as well. So, I mean, it's like super late. I mean, 11:30 or something like that. Manager calls me in after the game and is like, hey, you're on a plane tomorrow morning to Cleveland. I'm like, wow, it's crazy. I mean, after all of that huge delay in that game,
yeah,
to say, and I kind of suspected it was coming simply because I had pitched, a time or two before, and they were kind of starting to limit the number of pitches I was throwing. I was taken out of a game in Colorado Springs, and I was pitching fine, or either Colorado Springs or Salt Lake City, one of the two, like in the 4th inning. And it was like, something's brewing. So I kind of knew something was possibly coming, and I was pitching well too. So, but yeah, it was, I'll never forget, being told, how crazy of a night. It was like, man, why couldn't it just be a fast game? And I could have, gotten out of there. And by the time we got out of there, it's literally like, I found out 11:30 at night, and Vancouver, British Columbia. It's
right. It's
1:30,
1 a.m. in
absolutely
Cleveland,
in Iowa. So
yeah.
I'm like, my wife was in. I think she would have been in Tacoma at the time. So yeah, she would have been in Tacoma. So for her, it was the same time zone. So I was able to get a hold of her. And it was way before cell phones because I'm an old guy. But so to try and get a hold of my family and everybody to let them know. So then I had a day in Cleveland and then pitched the next day. So and they didn't even want me the day that I arrived in Cleveland because they had to make a roster move. They didn't even want me to go to the stadium yet. So the day that I was pitching was the first day that I went to the stadium. So
got it. They wanted you to hide out because somebody was
somebody was going to get either released or sent down or something. So yeah.
So you walk in, and at that time the Mariners were, it's June, but they were right in it, right? And they were expected. We talked about all the guys they had on the team. They were loaded with talent. They were looking to make the playoffs. What is that like going from an environment in, the minor leagues where, of course, you care about the standings, but it's not to the level of the major leagues where you're like, these guys, their salaries and their careers are based on how you perform in the standings, right? And you walk into a team that's, vying for the AOS title and that. So did you get a feel for that, a sense for that right away when you came into the locker room?
Yeah. It was honestly a team full of a lot of veterans, which I would say was good in a sense that the atmosphere was relatively loose because they all, their jobs were secure and they had some success, coming off the playoffs in '95. But at the same time, you could tell that it was, hey, we're here. We have a mission here. It's not, we're obviously you guys are making a lot of money and stuff like that, but it was different. Hey, this team right here, we want to win a title and make it as far through the playoffs as we possibly can. So there was some added pressure as a rookie coming up, to be added to a team that was really fairly loaded with veterans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. At the same time, that's kind of how baseball works, right? It's got to be this like healthy mix of guys. Like there's always a young guy on the team. There's always a 40-year-old guy on the team. And so I suppose baseball, maybe better than other sports, is good at kind of acclimating, different cultures, different ages, different, levels of experience into one locker room.
Yeah, I would say. And then obviously you have, leaders within that, as well, like Chris Bosio. So he played with Cal Eldred in Milwaukee. Eldred's an Iowa guy. And so he sees me coming in there and, he always called Cal Eldred corn-fed. So he right away is like, all right, your nickname's corn-fed. And I'd never been called corn-fed before in my life, but Bosio starts calling me corn-fed. And he kind of took me under his wing. He had a couple bad knees, so he was very sporadic and when he could even pitch. But kind of took me under his wing as one of those veteran leaders, welcomed me in, kind of, so guys like that, where you do have guys toward, and he knew he was toward the end of his career and he knew he could relate back to, and I'd have to ask him who it was for him that welcomed him into the clubhouse when they were, a rookie and,
right.
their debut is against a team that's coming off the playoffs the prior year, 95. I'd have to look back, but I guarantee you they were probably in first place in the Central. Cleveland was. Their record was ridiculous. Nagy is vying for starting the All-Star game potentially. Well,
they had Albert Bell and Paul Sorrento, and was Vizquel on the.
Sorrento was actually with us at the time.
Okay, yeah, and Vizquel and Sorrento, I know both were Seattle.
Yep. They were.
Baerga was on that team.
Yeah.
Albert Bell.
Yeah. Manny Ramirez.
How can you
Tommy.
Yeah.
They were.
Kenny Lofton.
They were pretty loaded. Their lineup. They were probably one of the top offensive lineups in the in the league. And then, but Nagy was off to just a ridiculous start. He wound up not winning the Cy Young. Henkin wound up winning the Cy Young, who of course I had to go head to head with in Toronto, but they were legit. And so after the fact, I'm like, dude, okay, I'm pitching on the road against probably one of the best teams in baseball right now, against one of the best pitchers in baseball. What kind of a welcome is this, But basically, so after the fact,
it went pretty well though.
It did go well.
6 innings, 3 runs. They'll take that any day of the week.
Absolutely, especially against that lineup, and it was right after when Albert Bell had done the forearm to
Fernando Vina. Oh yeah.
Laid him out, decleated him a week or two before. So he was actually in process of appealing his suspension. Technically should have been suspended. So we're in Cleveland. The dude's getting a standing ovation every single time he comes up to the plate. And it was one of those deals where it was one of those moments where you just kind of like, he was milking it. I mean, he's standing there on deck and, taking his sweet time getting up to the plate because he's literally getting a standing ovation every single time he came up to the plate. And it was kind of one of those things where I literally looked around. We're on ESPN, doubleheader, Wednesday night doubleheader. Berman's calling the game. It was so surreal to be out there. I mean, it was just crazy.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it earlier, but just such a short time frame from when you almost were completely done with the game to being at Jacobs Field against Albert Bell. You're playing for the most popular team in the American League against kind of the villains of the American League at that time on ESPN, like the whole thing right at the kind of height of maybe not the height of baseball because this is post-strike, but like baseball was still the forefront of sports in America at that time too.
Yeah, it was. So, I mean, just being there, I just remember when I went out to get loose in the bullpen. Bullpen's in right field at what's called Jacobs Field at the time. And I mean, Dan Wilson is back there getting me loose. And I'd probably thrown to Dan in spring training, throwing some bullpens or something to him. But so he's not moving the glove a quarter of an inch. I mean, every single pitch I throw is just absolutely perfect. And so I was like, okay, this is good, but sometimes the game mound is just enough different from the bullpen mound. And so I'm like, crap, I'm going to get out there and not be able to throw a strike. We're visitors, so we hit first. And I think we got a couple base runners maybe in the first inning, whatever. But I go out there and the first batter I'm facing is Kenny Lofton. And, the crowd, it's a packed house, crowd's going crazy. And, so I'm literally standing there looking in for the sign, and I mean, my legs are shaking, my hands are shaking. I'm literally just going, please God, can I throw a strike? And I throw the first pitch, and it is borderline. I mean, borderline. And umpire, boom, strike one. And I'm like, ooh, okay, that's good.
Sometimes that's all you need.
Oh my goodness. Oh, it was a huge weight right there. But then I throw strike two, and, Lofton kind of looks back like, this is a rookie, and so then Wilson calls a fastball inside. So then I just paint inside corner, and this was definitely on the plate. And Lofton kind of looks back like, like you can't give him both of those, So then I throw a 2-seamer off the plate. He doesn't offer at it. And then I throw like a curveball or something, and he hits this little ground ball to second base. First out. After that, I really just kind of it was almost like any other game. It was like, this is the game I grew up playing. The nerves really, really calmed down an awful lot. I mean, I mentioned, when Albert Bell, would come up and then he wound up hitting the home run off me, but just taking kind of all of that in, just kind of literally looking around and just going, this is real. I mean, this is literally at this moment a dream come true. And so it was just crazy to think about. I mean, none of that other stuff was really going through my mind at the time, but, hindsight, looking back, just going, game I grew up loving to play, thought I would never play it again. And then here I am a few years later, just literally living out my dream.
What'd you learn from the big unit?
He loves music and loves photography. He was, I would say, relatively quiet, really good guy, but relatively quiet. And he was kind of going through some of his back issues at the time. He was one of those guys that when he wasn't pitching, you could have a conversation with him. Quite frankly, a lot of times he didn't even really want to talk about baseball. He was more like, I mean, he would sit in the camera pit and he had a huge camera.
I know he's big into photography now, Stu.
Yeah, totally. And he would literally sit there and take pictures during a game of players and all, different situations in the game. And he also, he knew, like, he was into, of course, Seattle had a huge...
Oh, the grunge scene.
Exactly.
And,
So he had access to anything he wanted to go to from a music standpoint, too. But really good guy. But, he didn't really... I would say he didn't really... I mean, he's left-handed. So, if I ever wanted to, like, get... hey, how do you work this guy? He was just different. I mean, I could.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hey,
I'm 6'10" and I throw 100 miles an hour.
Exactly. Randy's like, dude, I just throw the ball. I mean, they can't hit it, so I just throw it. It's like, well, I'm not quite that good, so I need some help here. So,
do you think if you ran into Griffey or A-Rod on the street today, they'd be like, "Hey, Matt, how's it going? Haven't seen you in a while."
I'd probably have to remind them. I would think that they. I played with them.
Yeah, exactly.
And with A-Rod, I played in the minor leagues with him a little bit too. So I played a fair amount of golf with A-Rod back in the day when we were both in AAA. So after the strike hit, they did send him down right before the strike so he could continue to play in the minor leagues. And then that next year he bounced a little bit. I think they called him up too young, but they also wanted to make sure he was getting enough at bats and stuff too. So they did a good job of doing that. I know it wasn't ideal, but they did do a good job of kind of letting him develop a little bit more as a player. He was good. I mean, and it was one of those things too, where A-Rod would, we'd be on the road and, or even at home, but he's taking fungos during batting practice and he'd come and get me a lot of times because I think it kind of gave him confidence. I was one of the taller guys and he'd, have me catching in at first base. Like, okay, even though I'm like stretching for this ball, I'm still catching it. It's like kind of confidence builder for him and for his throwing. So he grabbed me to catch in at first base quite a bit. Probably because I was a rookie too. He'd probably walk up to Randy and go, "Hey, you want to catch in for him?" And be like, "Dude, no."
Right. You only spent that 1 year in the big leagues, but you continue to play after that. For a few more years, you played independent ball. You're up in the Atlantic League. How tough is that to kind of always know that, I want to get back to that, and that's in your head, and it's hard. Baseball can be this sport that can be kind of discouraging too. If you're playing and nobody's noticed it, you have a good outing, but nobody notices it, or you have a bad outing in the minor leagues after you've been in the major leagues and you say, what am I doing this for? Like, did those type of doubts or frustrations ever creep into your head after you had been with Seattle then, in 96 and then you continue to play?
Yeah, so after I left, I told Montreal, I'd been traded to Montreal, and I told them, I'm like, I can't throw a ball. I mean, after my third surgery, I literally could not throw a ball 60 feet without pain. And I told them, I said, I got to go back, finish my degree, and just get on with my life. And I fully accepted that. I mean, it was so painful to throw. I was like, well, this isn't going to work. So, and then I got the opportunity on a fluke to go and play independent ball. And I went out there, and I'll tell you, it was actually different. And I kind of wish I would have had somebody explain it to me, in advance. I mean, I appreciated the fact that I had the opportunity to play pro ball. I mean, I remember towing the rubber for the first time in A-ball and just sawing a dude off, on a fastball. And it's like, dude, an aluminum bat, that might have been a base hit, but this guy's carrying half a bat down to first base and his hands are ringing, so it was, but when I was able to go back and play independent ball, I remember putting the uniform on and really feeling like it was a privilege. I mean, it was, I had gotten something back, a game that I absolutely loved to play. I'd gotten that back. And so I think my perspective was a little bit different on that, and I mean, I took it very seriously out there, and my hope was to get back into organized ball or possibly go overseas. And I did ultimately have the chance to go to play in Taiwan. I'd signed a contract, and at the time it was right after 9/11. I'm like, you know what? I really don't want to be a half a world away. So I had a lot of success out there, had a lot of fun out in the Atlantic League. But it was time, and when I got to the end in the Atlantic League, the last batter I faced, Pork Chop Pugh, I'm pitching. I'd been traded over to Atlantic City from Newark, and Mitch Williams, wild thing, was our manager. Great guy, absolutely hilarious guy. And so I throw a pitch, and I pitched well. I mean, I really did. I pitched well. I mean, there were a lot of big league guys out there.
Yeah, the Atlantic League is no joke.
Very good league. And he hits an absolute missile right at the third baseman. And I figured this is going to be my last inning. And I think I was throwing a 1-run game, you know, 7th or 8th inning. And I figured this is going to be my last inning. We're going to bring the closer in and close it down. And he hits an absolute missile right at the third baseman. And I walked, and you kind of get to know these guys because there weren't that many teams in the league.
Right.
You see them all the time. You're facing them. You get to know these guys. And plus you knew some coming in. But he's not even 2 steps out of the box, and the third baseman's got the ball, flipping it over to the mound because it's the end of the inning. And I literally told him, I said, you know what? I said, that's probably the last professional pitch I'll ever throw. And you just had to hit a missile right at the third baseman. And he just kind of like looked at me like, that was kind of a heavy statement, you know.
Yeah, he's like,
and he kind of, he got a kick out of it or whatever. But I went back over to the dugout, and there was a walk to the clubhouse, and I was coming out of the game, and I got to my locker and unlaced my shoes and kind of tied the laces.
You knew
together.
that was it.
I knew that was it. Yeah, I knew that was going to be it in the United States more than likely, and hoping I could get overseas for a little bit. And I ultimately obviously had that opportunity, but I wasn't going to go back to the Atlantic League again. And organized ball, just the opportunity wasn't there at the time. And so I was like, you know what, but it was such I would say, kind of just a peaceful feeling to know it was on my terms. So I went back, I did it. I was told more than once, I would never play again when I was clear back at Arkansas. And then when I had to tell Montreal, like, dude, I can't throw a ball 60 feet. I thought I was concerned I would have limited function with my arm, even everyday life. And to be able to go back and play independent ball, and have some success there, and to be able to literally take my spikes off for the last time, hang them up and just go, hey, you know what? It was a good run.
Right.
Wouldn't trade it.
So, Matt, the way we end every episode of the Moonlight Graham show is with the 5 big questions. Okay, first question is, who's your all-time favorite teammate?
God, I got to name a few people. Bob Wolcott, awesome dude, still stay in touch with him. Raul Ibanez was probably from a teammate standpoint.
He was on those Seattle teams.
Absolutely. I played with him in A-ball. He was one of the guys in that 2-bedroom apartment with 6 people.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, fantastic human being. I mean, just salt of the life guy, or salt of the world kind of guy. And then, Bazio was kind of one of those guys that took me under his wing, but Griffey was a great teammate. A-Rod was a great teammate. So giving you way too many names there, but there were a lot of really, really good teammates along the way.
What's one memory that you have from your career when you look back now that reminds you of everything that you love about the game of baseball?
Just thinking, this is, after I got Lofton out, and my mind just kind of going to, I played this game when I was 10 years old in the backyard, and this is the same game. Just have fun. And to have that come to my mind in that moment was just like, hey, I've done this before. I love this game. Just give it everything you got.
Is there anything that nags at you from your career? I know you've had plenty of injuries that might still nag at you, but any, one pitch, one at bat, one start, something like that.
Oh, I mean, looking back, I pitched it in Boston, and it was a Sunday day game, and I literally did not feel well, and I probably should have said something, but so that day did not go very well. Otherwise, I feel like I gave it everything I had, and I mean, I really no regrets on anything. I mean, I wish my arm would have stayed healthy, but I don't know if I would have been good enough to stick around anyway. So,
What are you most proud of?
I would say, the fact that I've got my oldest daughter enjoyed playing softball. And she was a ton of fun to watch. Talent, just jumping out of her body. I mean, the girl had a ton of talent. So when she listens to this, and she knows, she's heard me say that, but she liked to have fun, which I, you know what, it was her experience. But the fact that she actually did enjoy the game, I'm proud of that fact, as well as with my son. Our youngest daughter hasn't really quite gotten into it yet. She plays a little bit of softball, but our son plays quite a bit of baseball, and he's got a nice arm, but he also kind of studies the game. We watch a lot of baseball. So, and I guess I'm proud of the fact that he has kind of taken to the game with kind of a similar love, and our oldest daughter as well. My wife, I'm so lucky. I mean,
yeah, she's been with you through
she's
all of
been
this.
through all of it. And quite frankly, to this day, I mean, I might have something different on TV, rarely, but then she'll go into a different room and put a baseball game on. So she is a huge baseball fan.
What a woman.
Which absolutely. So I'm really lucky in the sense that, you know, if we're, you know, driving cross country or something and it's baseball season, we'll have a baseball game on Sirius XM and listening to it, and she's just as into it as I am, and she knows players, she knows stats, and she has her favorites, and so I'm really lucky from that standpoint. But I'm just, you know, proud of my family and the fact that they love a game that I grew up loving, and so kind of passing on the torch to them.
I know what you say about the wife there. My wife the other day, I was telling her the Twins lineup. She said, what can I expect for the Twins this year? And I said, well, Sano's at first. And she's like, Sano? I thought Sano was a third baseman. I was like, whoa, Tori, you have come a long way. If you're, you know, asking me that, yeah, that's right. We picked up Josh Donaldson in the offseason, so Sano had to move over to third. He's like, all right, thanks for telling me. I was like, oh my God, I got the right woman.
It is, because, man, I'll tell you, seriously, we have, I mean, spring training games on right now.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much baseball on TV these days that, I mean, she loves it just as much as I do, which is fantastic. And quite frankly, before we started dating and stuff, I mean, she probably couldn't have said what a pitcher does. Honestly, she was that uninformed about the game of baseball, but she's grown to love it. And so I'm very fortunate.
That's cool. What's the best advice you've ever received, Matt?
You know, I think just to have fun, try to have fun. And it wasn't always that easy. I mean, playing with Seattle in particular, I mean, through the minor leagues, it was definitely a little bit different because, you know, the emphasis wasn't quite as much. I mean, the coaching staff wanted to win games, but it was also about development. So you could kind of have fun as part of that. But, you know, it was a little bit different once you got to the major league level because the winning piece of it, I mean, I was shocked. You know, one game I come out after giving up. I'll tell you a quick story on that. So I wound up pitching against the White Sox. I think I got a no decision. I left the game. This was at home, and I left the game, I think, with the lead. Actually, that was the day I think Charlie Sheen was up there. So, and I leave the game with the lead, and I'm mad, you know, that I gave up a base hit that wound up knocking me out of the game. We still had the lead, and Piniella was like, you know, he could tell I was frustrated, and he verbally came to me and said, you know, I appreciate that frustration. He's like, you know, you needed to execute right there. You didn't execute. We're still going to be all right. But, you know, I appreciate the fact that you do care about it. But that added pressure of winning, and actually we did wind up winning that game. I think I got a no decision in that game. We wound up winning it, but, you know, win 5-4 or something like that. And everybody's happy. And I'm like, dude, I did not pitch that well, but everybody was happy. It all of a sudden became more than, okay, I don't have to go out there and give up one run. We can win 6-5,
right,
and everybody's still happy. It was just very different. And it was hard. I would say a little bit harder almost to have fun in those moments because personally, I might not have had the best game, but the team won, and it was kind of a learning experience there. But I would say, you know, people along the way just saying, dude, enjoy it, you know,
yeah,
try and enjoy it.
Because it goes by quick. I mean, you spent a lot of time playing baseball, but I bet you look back on it now and thought, man, that was just a brief period of my life.
So brief. It does. It goes by really quick.
Well, Matt, thank you for coming on the Moonlight Graham Show. It's been a lot of fun going through your career, and especially with opening day coming up. It's always fun to talk baseball.
Absolutely. Play ball.
Hey guys, thanks once again to listening to today's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And even though I do most of the interviews here on the podcast, there is a ton of work that happens behind the scenes that you guys don't see that make each episode possible. So I got to give a shout out to the Moonlight Graham Show team. First of all, Brian Sandvig, our producer. Brian does all of the post-production work, and in real life, he's not just a podcast producer, he's also a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home down in the Kansas or Missouri areas, give Brian Sandvig a call. Next guy on that list is Brendan Gargano. Brendan does all of our design and artwork here on the podcast. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever met, and I love all of his work. If you need any help on the design side with logos or anything like that, give Brendan Gargano a call. The next guy on that list is Andy Flattery, my older brother. Andy, of course, has done some of the interviews here on the podcast. He also is a certified financial planner. He owns a business called Simple Wealth Planning. If you need any help in that area, check Andy Flattery out. And then, of course, the trusty co-host Tom Griffin and my younger brother Neil Flattery. Those guys are just busy being husbands, being fathers, they're family men, but also they do a ton of work here on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting the Moonlight Graham Show.